Welcome to this special edition of Inconvenient Questions, or IQ. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan, your host for today's discussion. The topic is 377A, agree or disagree. The wording reflects our desire for conciliation. It is an important topic because it's about identity, it's about civil liberty, it's about belonging. For precisely this reason, the topic has been divisive, it has been polarizing. Now, IQ believes in promoting a robust, honest, and informed conversation across boundaries that are, at the same time, respectful. We are determined to demonstrate that we can achieve this in this discussion. So here is some context for this discussion. In essence, Section 377A is a Singapore law introduced under British colonial rule. It criminalizes sex between consenting male adults. It was added to the Penal Code in 1938. In 2004, Associate Professor Ho Peng Kee, then Senior Minister of State for Law and Home Affairs, announced that the Penal Code would be reviewed. Section 377 and 377A would be examined. In 2007, after a robust debate, Parliament repealed Section 377 and replaced it with the new Section 377, which prohibited sex with a corpse. Section 377A was retained. However, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong gave this assurance in Parliament, quote, "We don't harass gays, the government does not act as moral policemen, and we don't proactively enforce Section 377A on them," close. This, however, did not assuage the concerns of the gay community in Singapore, as well as others who felt it was discriminatory. Over the years, there was no less than 5 constitutional challenges. Former Chief Justice Chan Teck Keong also weighed in with a 72-page article in the Singapore Academy of Law Journal. He stated quite categorically that Section 377A would violate the principle of equality of all persons before the law and not permit them to enjoy equal protection of the law, which is provided for by Article 12(1) of the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the state, the Constitution. In 2014, responding to constitutional changes made in 2010 and 2012, the Court of Appeal issued a landmark ruling that Section 377A was constitutional. The court noted that the guarantee of equal protection under the law, as enshrined in Article 12 of the Constitution, touches only on issues relating to religion, race, place of birth, and descent, and not gender, sex, and sexual orientation. In 2018 and 2019, there were 3 additional constitutional challenges. Lawyers for the parties included Senior Counsel Harpreet Singh. They argued that the original purpose of 377A was to curb male prostitution and not to curb private sex acts. In addition, the team reiterated the argument that 377A was incompatible with Articles 12 and 14 of the Constitution, pertaining to equality before the law and freedom of expression, respectively. In response, earlier this year, that is in February 2022, the Court of Appeal upheld Section 377A, stating that it was constitutional. The court, however, ruled that it was not enforceable in its entirety. Chief Justice Sundaresh Menon also stressed that any judicial ruling on Section 377A ought to concern only its legality or constitutionality, and it cannot extend to the policy merits or socio-political desirability of retaining or repealing it. Now, fast forward to August of 2022. During the National Day rally, Prime Minister Lee announced that Section 377A would be repealed. He said, and I quote him, "While we remain a broadly conservative society, gay people are now better accepted in Singapore, especially among younger Singaporeans. It is timely to ask ourselves again the fundamental question, should sex between men in private be a criminal offense?" Unquote. Apart from shifting societal attitudes toward same-sex relationships, the Prime Minister noted the significant risk of 377A being struck down in future challenges that are legal. He quoted this, he said this, and let me quote him. "We have seen several court challenges to Section 377A, seeking to declare the law unconstitutional. None have succeeded so far. However, following the most recent judgment in the Court of Appeal, the Minister for Law and the Attorney General have advised that in a future court challenge, there is a significant risk of Section 377A being struck down on the grounds that it breaches the equal protection provision in the Constitution," close quotation. The following day, Minister for Law and Home Affairs, K. Shanmugam, in an interview to the Straits Times and Liana Chao-Pao, said this, and I quote him, "There is some confusion. The definition of marriage is not going to be in the Constitution. That is not the intention. The risk is that the current definition of marriage in the Women's Charter can be challenged on the basis that it is in breach of Article 12 of the Constitution." He emphasized that the definition of marriage would be an issue decided by Parliament. He said, and I quote him, "What we are planning to do is to put into the Constitution explicitly that Parliament can define the institution of marriage and in the way it is defined in the Women's Charter, and it can make other pro-family policies on the basis that definition, on the basis of that definition, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that these laws and policies which rely on the definition of marriage cannot be challenged in court by reference to Article 12, by reference to the Constitution," close quotation. So this is where we are today. While the repeal of Section 377A is welcomed by many, it has also opened the proverbial floodgates. The questions being asked include, what next? Same-sex marriage? Adoption of children by gay couples? Clearly and understandably, this is a cause for concern for the more conservative sections of our society. The concerns are about going down the slippery slope where values, norms, and tradition are threatened. Highly inconvenient questions that nevertheless must be addressed and not kicked down the road. Now let's have a discussion in good faith. As fellow Singaporeans, we should be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And even if we end up agreeing to disagree, we should be able to do so in a manner that fosters understanding, empathy, and involvement. Alex is a social activist and political commentator. Alex was among the first generation of gay activists in Singapore. Next, we have Chang Tao Chen. Tao Chen is a Bible school instructor and a pastor at 316 Church. Prior to his pastoral role, he had spent more than 20 years in the banking and financial industry as an investment banker. I guess you could say he saw the light. Anthea Ong. Anthea is a social activist and an entrepreneur. As chairperson of a good space, Anthea initiated the Mind the Gap collective in April of 2020. She was a former nominated member of parliament in Singapore. Last but certainly not least, we have Eugene Tan. Eugene is an associate professor of law at the Singapore Management University, or SMU, specializing in fields such as constitutional and administrative law. He too was a former nominated member of parliament in Singapore. It is IQ tradition to ensure that we listen to the voice of youths. We have 4 youth representatives who have a keen interest in the subject. Carissa Chow, a community organizer and writer. She has just completed a master's degree at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Next, we have Nailul Farah Muhammad Masbur. Farah is currently working as a research analyst. Samuel Tan is a third-year undergraduate studying business at the National University of Singapore. Last but certainly not least, the 4th representative representing youths here, Raj Kumar, President of the Youth Wing of the Interreligious Organization, or IRO, in Singapore. He's currently pursuing his master's degree at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. To our live audience on this Zoom platform, you're welcome to engage via the chat function by texting your views. Now, if you wish to share your views verbally, just raise your hand electronically. We will do our best, I assure you, to get to you. We would like you to make your point on vision. With that, let us begin the discussion for tonight. The topic, once again, 377A, agree and disagree. Panelists, a quick 3-minute curtain raiser comment from each one of you. Full disclosure, I have this ejection button if you exceed 3 minutes. Alex, let's start with you. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Viswa. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I'm so pleased to be here. So let me just begin by saying the proposed repeal has been a long time coming. We've been talking about it in our community for something like close to 30 years. And well, I guess better late than never. But what is important, despite the title of tonight's conversation, is that we shouldn't be looking at the issue merely from the perspective of sex, because it really isn't just about sex. For 30 years, the conversation should have been and has been in parts about the equal place of LGBT persons in Singapore. And by that, I mean issues like job discrimination, career advancement, their access to housing on the same basis as other citizens, recognition and dignity in their family relationships, access to information, freedom to express themselves and to represent themselves, and therefore to combat stigma and stereotype. And for young people, particularly bullying in schools. So these are the issues that are really at the center. And if we only talk about sex, it's really, really too narrow. All right. And to only focus on what 377A deals with, which is about sex, is really to not address the whole range of issues and once again reduce LGBT persons to mere sexual objects, or worse, as sexual miscreants. One last point that I would like to make very quickly is that I find it rather mind-boggling that the government has chosen to remove the purview of the courts, to oust the purview of the courts, the question of family and marriage, outside of the purview of the courts. Even as legal experts, including the Attorney General and the Minister for Law, saying that there's a good risk that the present definition of family may be overturned because it violates the equality clause of the Constitution. So knowing full well that a good argument can be made about the inequality of our present marriage arrangements, what is the response? The response is not to then recognize the fairness of it, but instead to pull back and say, okay, it may not be challenged. I think that's quite astounding. And I think that is actually a very bad precedent to set for Singapore's constitutional development as well as our moral development as a people. So thank you very much, Viswa, for this opportunity. Let's talk more in the hour and a half ahead.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Tao Chen, over to you.
Thank you, Vishwa. Really glad to be here tonight. As was pointed out just now, there is more to just the repeal of Section 377A than the single piece of legislation. As a result, there has been some segments of society who are growing increasingly aware of the urgency now to protect, for example, the definition of marriage, the interest of children, and even the freedom of conscience. I'm sure we'll discuss marriage, family, and all that later tonight. So I want to raise right now the urgency of protecting the freedom of conscience. Now, social discrimination faced by LGBT persons has been widely highlighted, and no doubt this still exists today. What is less well known is the just as real and the increasing workplace, social, and online discrimination against those who express any alternative perspective to that of the LGBT ideology. Now, I agree that LGBT persons should not be discriminated against just because they experience same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. But neither, though, Should anyone be discriminated against just because they express a different worldview to that of the LGBT ideology? Now, I've learned from the Protect Singapore town halls that have been organized a couple of months ago, and even the youth edition of that Protect Singapore town hall just a couple of weeks ago, where thousands were there, from those who spoke up in those town halls. And I've learned also from public dialogue sessions how young people in our workforce are being increasingly pressurized by their employers to affirm or to celebrate LGBT ideology irrespective of their personal discomfort or objection. I've also learned separately of this young, passionate debater who was excluded from being fielded in his school debate team because his stand was not supportive of same-sex marriage, and he was told to change that stand, otherwise he wouldn't be fielded, even though the debate matches that he was going to participate in were not about this subject. I also know of those who have been viciously attacked on social media when they express a different opinion to that of celebrating the gay lifestyle. Now, these types of discrimination are just as wrong. And the repeal of Section 377A and its messaging and perceived signaling may open the floodgates to further such harassment and coercion. So protections against this are urgently needed. And I'm very glad to notice that the government has said that they intend to deal with this seriously. Let me pause there, Vishwa, and pass it back to you.
Were you referring that in your final statement, were you referring to cancel culture?
Cancel culture is part of it, Vishwa, yes. But of course, there's the broader aspect of
harassment.
Yes.
Now, I mean, what you've highlighted is quite astounding if those things happen, because any form of discrimination, either way, either side, should not be condoned, or where activism actually crosses the line and becomes militancy, So thank you for highlighting these points.
I'm grateful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anthea, over to you.
Thank you, Vishwa. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to be really quick in terms of just sharing, my views in terms of my response to the proposed and the impending repeal of 377A, and keep it to that, and maybe give my views about the marriage definition and the definition of family later. I welcome the impending appeal of 377A as it's long overdue for 3 reasons in my view. The first is the legal one. So we've always maintained that the rule of law is a universal value in Singapore, and that we uphold a rules-based order world, right? We have always talked about there being a culture, respect for the law, which we all hold dear as citizens, which we all know also has resulted in much international respect and trust. So I'm not sure if we are staying in integrity to this value, to this culture, or to this international standing, if we continue to hold this law, right? When we know that it is actually a badly crafted, antiquated law, but it's not enforced. Even if it's meant to signal the majority stance on not accepting homosexuality, the law doesn't do that either. As we know, it's just targeted at men. So that's the first reason, the legal one. The second one would be the secular reason. I think the secular nature of our society is the core foundation of our cohesion and identity that will fall apart by keeping this legal provision. We have been keeping it, and I think that's resulted in lots of polarization and lots of contestation, especially when the dominance of certain religious interpretations confuse a sin as a crime, right? It is also important to note that this is not necessarily seen as a sin in all the religions that are practiced in Singapore. So it also really shakes the fundamental premise of Singapore as a multicultural and multi-religious society. So how do we decide which sin from which religion gets to be called a crime? I think it's where the secular, last but not least, for me, it's the humanity and empathy reason, right? Which is closest to my heart. We've been singling out a certain group of individuals, of Singaporeans, of citizens to penalize and marginalize. even if not legally, I mean, it is legally, but since we don't enforce it, maybe we can say that it's not legal marginalization, but most definitely socially that causes and have caused emotional and mental harm. And the second part, means a lot to me in terms of the mental health of this group. And I would say that any form of discrimination causes, very severe mental harm and injury. Equality in society, I think is what I'm getting to, occurs when everyone is treated equally, where no one faces discrimination based on traits like race and gender and age and sexuality or disability. It's an ideal. Of course, we can say that it's not going to happen, but it's an ideal that every civilized society aspires and must want to aspire towards, so that we can operate from a place of love for all, so that everyone can access equal opportunities and the resources that they need to thrive. This is also encapsulated, I think we have talked about it, we'll discuss more in Article 12 of the Constitution, that guarantees to all persons, right, equality before the law and equal protection of the law. So that's my initial response to.
Thank you very much, Anthea.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the law professor, Eugene.
Thanks, Vishwa. I think it's been 7 years since I was last on IQ, but it's good to be back.
Thank you.
So some quick thoughts. I think repealing 377A is the right thing to do. 377A was foisted on independent Singapore by our colonial masters, but certainly that doesn't absolve us. I think law reform could have taken place much earlier, but that didn't happen. So I think in the intervening period, 377A has acquired significance, something that we don't see in other countries with the similar provision. So I think to some segments of Singaporeans, 377A is a standard bearer, a moral marker of sorts. So it is not surprising, that our political parties, as well as the government, have been informed by societal attitudes towards homosexuality. It is again no surprise that 377A has not featured in any of our general elections. I think it is fair to say that it was probably a vote losing proposition, and I probably think that it still is. So I think when we look at the proposed repeal, some segments of the LGBT community, as well as the conservatives, say that the proposed measures don't go far enough. So, for example, so I think I will elaborate on that later on. But I think it's also important to mention at this juncture, that the LGBT plus community as well as the conservative community are not homogeneous. So I think when we look at the anticipatory changes, I think they would enable Singapore, to better manage the differences. I think what is really important, is to also recognize that there is no magic in the repeal of 377A. It will not automatically end discrimination. Neither would it lead to an automatic rapprochement between people like us and people unlike us. But I think what the repeal can do is to remove the baggage that 377A is. It removes that element of criminality in consensual same-sex sexual acts. So I think I will probably just pause for now, other than perhaps hope that we can learn to thrive, despite our deepest differences. But for that, it will require deliberation, debate, and discernment.
Thank you, Eugene. While I still have you there, let me ask you this question. PM Lee said in his rally speech that, and I quote, "There is a significant risk of Section 377A being struck down." Now, could you share with us why it is considered a risk? Why is it a risk that it could be struck down? Now, some people argue that it is struck down because it's not relevant. And the judges in the Court of Appeal, that's their job. So why is it a risk? What is the difference between Parliament repealing 377A and it being struck down by the courts as being unconstitutional? What is the difference? Why is it a risk?
Right. So I think it is clear from the latest judgment on 377A, Tan Seng Kee and the Attorney General.
Yeah.
That the Court of Appeal expressed in an implicit way, perhaps in some parts rather explicit, that 377A is unlikely to survive another constitutional challenge because it infringes Article 12, which is a provision that provides for equality before the law and equal protection of the law. So I think here, the courts have given the signal, that they think that this law is on its last legs, that it is potentially unconstitutional. And so I think the right thing to do for any government, would be to respond accordingly. And in this case, to avoid, a situation where the courts were to strike it down. You asked a very pertinent question, what is the difference? I think if Parliament were to repeal 377A, it would ensure that the impact of that repeal, whether it relates to definition of marriage, whether it relates to education, public housing, and entitlements, adoption, the whole gamut of public policies, that the impact, can be managed, and it is clear what the consequence would be. Whereas if the court, were to strike down 377A, certainly the courts would be mindful that many of our public policies are built on the basis of marriage being between a man and a woman. But unlike Parliament, they may not be able to see or be able to appreciate some of the deeper ramifications of public policy. And so that could perhaps create even more uncertainty, where the law is concerned. It could result in even more litigation. So I see the proposed changes to the penal code as well as the constitution as not only being the right thing to do, but certainly necessary, because we certainly don't want, the repeal of the striking down of 377A by the courts, to result in even more uncertainty.
Okay. Any other thoughts, panelists, on this point? The issue of risk of the courts striking it down. Yes, Alex.
I find it very interesting that Eugene has actually reiterated the point that there will be going forward a high risk of the courts striking down 377A, and by extension, the courts striking down the definition of marriage in our present Women's Charter. And I get Eugene's point that, you don't just, the impact of just declaring one particular piece of legislation as void or unconstitutional may have unintended consequences on the workings of other pieces of legislation, and therefore a more considered response through a complete review of affected legislation may be the smoother, wiser, more manageable way forward. But unfortunately, that is not the way forward that the government has said it will take. Unfortunately, the government is actually saying nothing else changes. So, while Eugene has sketched out what would be the right thing to do, in fact, that is not what they are doing. And that's really, really disappointing.
I believe the Chief Justice, Sundaresh Menon, did comment on that. He did say, and I'm paraphrasing, he did say that it's not for the courts to decide on whether the law is apt, whether the law is good, on the merits of the law. So he made it very clear that he doesn't think that evaluating the merits of the law as it stands today is the responsibility of the judiciary. So the qualitative assessment of the law is left to the the legislature. And constitutional experts would argue that that is the correct way of doing it. Otherwise it could be kind of sharp if the courts start doing that. So I'm not sure. I mean, Eugene, you could come in, but my own point is I don't think he was referring to the second part of the discussion, which is about same-sex marriage legislation and so on, or constitutional change. He was referring to the repeal of 377A. Eugene, would you like to clarify?
Vishwa, I think what the Court of Appeal made it quite clear, and it was not just in Tan Seng Kee, but in earlier 377A cases, that the courts shouldn't act as a mini legislature. And in that sense, what you're referring to is that on very socially divisive issues, there is very little role for the courts. The courts cannot assess extra legal arguments, but they can certainly look into the merits of the law, to determine whether a particular provision, is constitutional or not. The second point, which I think, which Alex raised, is that I don't think certainly in Tan Seng Kee, as well as all the other 377A cases, the court did not indicate at all that the definition of marriage in our statute books is potentially unconstitutional. The courts did not have to decide on that, and so they express no opinion. The concern really arises, I think, where the government, for the government, the concern is that that there could be constitutional challenge, right, on whether the legal definition of marriage is that between a voluntary monogamous union of a man and a woman, whether that's constitutional, that could be game for lawsuits, and the government has taken the view, that this is something that should be decided, through the democratic process.
So why don't we leave this discussion here for now? I'd like to pick up from something that Tao Chen brought up in his opening statement. Frankly, I'm pretty disturbed by some of the examples and instances that you cited about harassment in the workplace, things like that. I mean, I'm really surprised because that's actually a very strong allegation. Now, I'd like to have you elaborate, if you'd like to, on some of those cases that have come to you. And Anthea, as a social activist, I'd like to hear your views as well on how we should manage something like this, because when it comes to activism, it's very hard to establish when it begins and when it ends. And people can get carried away in the name of activism. So I'd like to hear both your views about this, because discrimination and harassment either side, either way is wrong. I think we can all agree on that. Tao Chen, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vishwa. And absolutely, I mean, I do agree that discrimination both ways, either way, in all ways, is wrong and needs to be addressed. So I've heard of I heard this young guy talk about how during the Pride Month, the employees were expected to post things that were gay affirming, LGBT affirming, and they were monitored on whether they did so or not. Now, of course, there was no explicit instruction that if you do not post, your career will be terminated, right? But the implicit pressure was there. Now, I've also heard of younger people in the more junior ranks, because they've been around less long and also because they have less weight in the organization, when they're facing similar implicit encouragements, they don't know how to respond. And they feel that they have to conform because there's no way out. They don't want to test the boundary of whether it's career limiting, and why should they? Why should they, right? But they have no. There's no way for them to register their discomfort even let alone opt out, because it would be so obvious if they did. So these cases of implicit pressure is not good, not right, and we should all unite to stand against this. Now, and by the same token, please let me also emphasize, as I said earlier, I do not stand for discrimination against LGBT persons either. So this is not a one-way street only, okay? But all I'm trying to highlight is that this is also not a one-way, picture of society. That entire society, discriminates against LGBT persons.
I guess it goes back. Yeah, I guess it goes back, Tao Chen, to the fundamentals of our society. I mean, the belief in tolerance. We can't overstate the importance of that word tolerance, and of course accommodation, restraint. All these words are very important. Very quick question before I go over to Anthea. Now, did you understand these, find out about these instances in your capacity as a pastor? Is that how you got to know about this?
No, actually, in many of these instances that I got to discover, they were through secular channels. So, for example, the Protect Singapore town halls, 2 of them, one for the general public and one for the youth edition, thousands of people came, and many spoke up out of their own free will in the open mic. And I found some of these instances out there. These were secular gatherings. And I was surprised by the extent of these incidences. Now, please understand, these are people who have chosen to speak out. Yeah. And in Singapore society, and I'm sure, Eugene, in your classes and so on, if you were to ask students any questions, the likelihood of someone actually putting up their hands and coming up to the mic to speak in front of 1,400 people is very low. So I don't know how many instances that I'm not trying to extrapolate out of mathematical, imprecision, but I'm trying to make the point that this is not as isolated as one might think it is. So I do think we need to be very aware of this, and we need to be united, in intellectual consistency against discrimination on all fronts. Right. I mean, we can all, because we've been tutored this way for years, we can all unite against discrimination based on religion, race, and so on, but also based on worldviews. We should not be discriminated on just because we have a different worldview. And here I think we need to do a bit more tutoring of our society, and we need to be a bit more united around this.
Thank you, Tao Chen. I'll go over to Anthea. What's your response to what Tao Chen raised? And by the same token, the points that Alex raised earlier. That we should not just look at it through the lens of sex and sexuality.
So, Tao Chen, I hear you. And I think, I think we all agree, this is probably one where we all agree there isn't an or all. We all agree that any form of discrimination, marginalization, canceling, it's not what we want, based on whatever premise, right? So that's the first response I would give. I think, what's coming up to me is, what Alex and, Tao Chen shared really demonstrate how we are probably still having a conversation from both sides of the polls. Right. And I think Vishwa, you started this conversation saying that it is divisive, it is polarizing, and that's much contestations. Right. And I think, if we continue to come from the vantage of the ends of this spectrum, then we continue to struggle with where do we go? How do we move this conversation and this needle? I would also add that, I would like to propose that we go beyond tolerance. If we want to actually come together, then it's not just tolerance that we should be looking at, but actually understanding and accepting, right? There are differences between us. And this is not just for, obviously, the pro and, anti, LGBTQ or repeal of 377A. I think this understanding needs to come about if we want to be able to accept and live, together. I do want to say though, and Tochen, and as you know, I've been, championing for mental health for a very long time. And I think one of the main concerns in mental health has always been, and for a long, long time, that actually even prompted WHO, the World Health Organization, to come out to actually issue a directive on the double stigma that we must be aware of when we come to mental health of LGBTQ community across the world. And that comes from the fact that there is a mental health stigma and the homophobia stigma, right? And so it's come from lots of research that's been done across the world. It's been conclusively shared that there is about 25 to 30% higher risk of people in the LGBTQ community, in terms of having mental health conditions because of this sort of continuous discrimination and marginalization. Suicide rates, same thing, that is definitely a higher risk with this group. So the only reason I'm sharing this is, the views might be changing and more accepting of LGBTQ, but there's been a long time of this discrimination that has actually prompted, international organizations like WHO to come out to put out a directive, right? To look at, this really critical, vulnerable group from a mental health perspective. And I think the same, obviously, as we start seeing more of this contestation, to Tochen's point, we might then see more of those who, are expressing their view, and as you said, wanting that freedom of conscience, also facing this discrimination, and then, then we might get another problem ahead of us. But I think up to date, a lot of the directives have been actually, put out for looking at mental wellness and well-being of LGBTQ community.
So to pick up from your point, Anthea, and as well as Tauchen, your point, right? I think discrimination is obviously for all of us, and I see our youth representatives nodding your heads as well. I think there's consensus here. That's out. As a society, we will eschew it. We will not tolerate. We should not. That's good. But I think we need to look at two different types of discrimination, if I may. One is incident-based discrimination, like the incidents that you talked about. Those are incident-based. And then there is long-term entrenched discrimination, which is policy level, right? Like 377A is something that I would consider perhaps can be viewed as a policy level, lifestyle level discrimination, because it goes against the spirit of Article 12.1 of the Constitution, and of course Article 14, right? So I think we should look at both ways, and incident-based is easier for us to deal with because you deal with the incident, but it's more insidious when it has been there for some time and it's subterranean, and people have been forced to accept that form of discrimination for a long time, So I'd like to just, yes, Alex, quick one, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Viswa. That's really, really to the point. Yes, there are bad incidents out there, which I think all of us, as Anthea said, will not approve of. But yes, it's good to bring our minds to this question of the setting, the context, and how it's been institutionalized and all that. And even, I'm sorry to say it here, that even tonight, we are actually seeing a continuation of that. I would like to call out and point out that Tao Chen actually used two terms which are actually offensive to the LGBT community. He used the term LGBT ideology, and he used the term gay lifestyle. So by the continued use of terminology like that, which is offensive and paints that target community as somehow unreasonably dogmatic, like LGBT ideology, or misbehaving and generally immoral or unethical gay lifestyle, I think that actually continues this institutionalization of discrimination. So although it is bad that today we have some people who are suffering from the reverse kind of this discrimination, and that should not be condoned, let's not forget that LGBT people have suffered in independent Singapore some 50 years of policy-based, as you said in your words, Wiswa, thank you very much, discrimination. And I'm afraid, trying to paint the conservatives as now the new victims of discrimination is not going to wash.
Well, I think either side should, should, as Anthea says, we should try and accommodate. Technically speaking, what you said, Alex, is absolutely correct. These terms could be politically incorrect, the terms that Tao Chen used. But at the same time, if you look at Tao Chen, in this short discourse, I can tell you, I don't think he intended it that way. So I think we also have to cut people some slack. If we are quick to pounce, you're not going to give that person a chance to change. I can say it. I'm not going to go to Tao Chen and get his views, because that's going to make it adversarial. I'm going to go to the
not
views.
adversarial.
Yes,
I'm grateful for moderation. But I can understand what Alex is saying. I mean, I get it, because he was at the pioneer, right, of championing for gay rights when the society and the background was totally different from what it is today. So I of course I understand, given the weight of what he has faced before and how he has, pushed the boundaries and in many ways, raised awareness across Singapore society, and the weight that he had to bear, pushing through all those barriers. I can understand how he is, informed by that, and how he's very alert, to these terms and so on. So, I'd be grateful for anything that I can learn in terms of what better way to phrase things that I am trying to phrase, using a form of words to explain the things I'm trying to explain. Right?
Wonderful. So, Alex, I would like you to conduct a workshop for Tao Chen. And that workshop will be moderated by Anthea. And of course, we'll have our legal counsel to make sure that there are no rules broken in the process. No, but this is fantastic, guys. Really, honestly, I mean, the tone. Just look at the tone that all of us are using. We are disagreeing with each other, yet in a manner. And what a great example we older guys are setting for our young comrades. So this is the right time to go to the young people who've been nodding their heads and expressing and indicating to me that they want to speak. I'd like to go first to Raj, who's most expressive so far. Yes, Raj. What is it you've been burning to say? You got to unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I mean, firstly, I'm very grateful to be on this panel with all of you. I think I do understand where Tao Chen comes from in terms of highlighting these incidents, but I actually wanted to bring our attention on the fundamental issue of the day, in that in these debates, we often forget to humanize the other, be it in terms of both spectrums that we are from. And I think what often gets missed out in the process is about what are the fundamental needs of both the communities, or rather what are the needs that they are championing and pushing for. If I can say from my own experience in my interfaith dialogues, as well as my volunteering experience, what I can say is that at least on the religious front, usually it is about the fact that the concept of family and what that entails later on is something that is a pure concept, and I mean, it is something that they seek protection of, and it is fundamental to their religious teachings. And I think it becomes unfair then of one group to say that these teachings can be changed or are not good and whatnot, and vice versa. I think what happens on the religious front is that often because of that lack of interaction, there's often a lot of animosity, a lot of apprehensions that keep us believing that these people, the LGBT community, does not really have a human face. So I think that lack of friendships and coming together to truly have such dialogues like this is missing thus far. And this is the key to really laying out a lot of the issues that both communities struggle with. And I think I definitely feel that this is an excellent platform to really bring together all demographics, all characteristics, all groups within society to have an open-hearted discussion about what we seek for our communities and what we would like for the other. And I think for the law itself, my personal belief is that ultimately I do see an effort from the government in trying to find middle ground through extensive consultancy. But again, not every solution, I guess, can be dealt with the law. Some things require hard work and hard work with our activism and volunteering. Thank you.
Raj, sorry, how old are you?
I'm 26.
I mean, you're disgusting.
Okay.
There's so much of wisdom in you. What's wrong with you, man? At 26, you've got a lot more wisdom packed inside you compared to the rest of us sitting here. We're supposed to be older and wiser, but you are incredibly wise. Thank you so much.
I'm a product of the wonderful people I've met in my life. Thank you.
I'd like to meet them too. Thank you so much, Raj. There was so much you packed into that. And thank you. That's exactly the direction we should be taking. Sam, can we go to you after this? Yeah.
Hi. Are you able to hear me? Right. Thank you so much. I'm really very happy to be here. It's such an honor, Thank you so much, Eugene, Anthea, Alex, Tao Chen, and Visra for hosting this. It's one of the very rare occasions that we get to see such a nuanced dialogue, and I think there's a lot of good discussion here. I have some thoughts actually. While I love the how everyone is able to share openly, I'm a bit concerned about the language policing over here, about the censoring of certain terms that we deem unacceptable. Because personally, while I was on campus, I remember the very first day in school, I was pressured to address people by preferred pronouns, and then that was my orientation, and it was quite scary because I was in a new place, new people. I was dependent on my seniors, and then basically, it's something that really I felt that I have no way out besides conforming to it, and I'm seeing it again today, and it's quite concerning if we are unable to speak, speak our views, without being embarrassed. That I feel that is something to that we can work on together, But nonetheless, I'm very happy to be here. I thank everyone, for being so candid. Thank you, Anthea, Visra, Alex, Tao Chen, Prof. Eugene for just sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, maybe we'll go to Farah. Farah?
Hi, okay.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much everyone here for opening up this space for a safe conversation. And I think particularly for myself, coming from a certain background, there is always that fear of, is my voice acceptable? Is my viewpoint acceptable? Actually, Prof. Eugene was my professor in SMU. I was in his class before, and he was one of those people who actually allowed me a safe and open space to share about my own experiences, of not feeling safe.
Sorry, Farah, why is it that you wouldn't feel safe? Is it because you're wearing a scarf?
And no, this is particularly, it does have to do with my Islamic principles and my Islamic beliefs, but it's more so to do with I'm unfortunately in such a public space. I'm not ready to be speaking about where my certain traumas are coming from.
No worries.
So I do not want to mention those incidences because psychologically I'm still not at the point where I'm mentally strong enough to be speaking of those issues. However, coming forward, I've been trying to build up on those confidences. So just like Alex is and Anthea is saying, coming from a space where the opposition of our ideals, of our principles is so strongly opposed, it is a very psychologically difficult task to go forward. And unfortunately, now we have entered another situation where it's a shift, right? It's a shift from one spectrum to another spectrum where people are feeling again a bit unsafe. And I think we need to come to a center where no matter which area of the spectrum that you are coming from, that you should feel safe to candidly, to be honest, voice out your own personal principles, your own personal understandings. And it is important also to note that it is actually not homogeneous. People who are, whether they are pro or against the repeal, they are not homogeneous. And people who are, I think, let me just speak candidly, I think why sometimes we do mention the words LGBTQ lifestyle or LGBTQ ideology is for myself. I've met so many people who have experienced LGBTQ, for example, same-sex attractions, or they have identity issues of whether they feel male or female in this kind of issues, but they do not actually want to enter the activism or the lifestyle choices. So that's why I think there is that differentiation, because even the people in that LGBT community are not homogeneous.
Correct.
So I think that's why there is the differentiation between the ideology, lifestyle, as well as the community, because of the lack of homogeneity. And I think it's also unfair to assert certain perspectives onto the community themselves, so that's my... So
basically, if I'm hearing you right, let's avoid labeling, broad brushing, because there are, let's not assume that these groups are all homogeneous and therefore we can just pigeonhole. Right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a very valid point. We all are guilty of that from time to time. Yes. Labeling is a very convenient way of making broad assumptions and generalizations. Thank you. I need to keep the discussion going. And Carissa.
All right, thank you for having me, and great discussion we've had today so far. I think I just want to start by sharing 3 points. And this is, I come to this discussion in 3 capacities today. The first is as a queer person myself. The second is as a person of faith myself. And the third is as a community organizer. So having been in a lot of my different spaces, a lot of my different communities that have experienced a lot of these things firsthand, right? So
your volume is very low.
Okay,
is there a reason?
Can you hear me clearly now? Can you hear me better now?
No, because earlier on when doing the testing, I think it was okay.
Yes. Earlier was okay, right? But
now why don't you lean forward closer to the microphone? Perhaps that may help. And speak a bit slower, Carissa.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Can you hear me better now? Can you hear me better now?
Better.
All right, better?
Yes.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for having me today. And I think great to have this discussion going on so far. And I wanted to share that I'm coming here speaking in 3 primary capacities in this conversation. And this is where I'll be coming from, just to state clearly. So the first is I am a community organizer by background. I've worked with a lot of my communities, brought together members of my different communities to kind of work together to meet our collective needs. The second is I am a queer person myself. I'm openly queer. And the third is that I'm also a person of faith, obviously, as you can see. And the 2 aspects are actually quite, for me, they're actually very closely intertwined. So because the common narrative that we tend to hear is almost very much, oh, if you are religious, then you can't possibly be like queer accepting because the teachings are like that in a certain way. But one thing that I've learned from being I guess, encountering community for the first time from many of my other queer converts is the fact that there's this saying that we always have, your mileage may vary. So there's no single one-size-fits-all rule in any community, in any demographic, in any space, in any ecosystem that we go to. And that's something that I think applies across the board as well, including when it comes to religious matters as well, because I think there's this seeming concern that, oh, what if some of these things may infringe on, say, for example, some of the concerns were brought up earlier, like, oh, freedom of conscience, for example. I speak as someone whom I discovered and I came to accept myself as a queer person precisely because I discovered my own religion here. And the 2 of them are interconnected. And this is a perspective that if I raise this publicly, this is not something that most people would see as conventional. This is not something that most people accept. So I'm very clear about some of these things, right? So when we talk about how we want to really bridge this gap, a lot of it has got to understand that this ultimately boils down to a matter. This is speaking from my own community as well. Most of us can't care less what people feel in private. most of us can't care less about what people personally believe in private. What we want is for our material conditions to be better. What we want is for our basic needs to be met. You know, we have a job, we have education, we have healthcare, we have housing, we have things that, you know, we need to survive. So, and this is why I always have this rejoinder that I like to, this joking rejoinder I like to say whenever people ask, like, so what is this gay lifestyle that people talk about, right? My gay lifestyle is trying to survive. Waking up every day trying to survive, trying to feed myself, trying to feed my communities, and trying to support each other and not die. That's really what what this lifestyle looks like. And I think once we start hearing from each of us, and I always also want to say that what I say here does not represent the rest of the community, because there are many different perspectives. And if you want to find out more, speak to other members of the communities, different communities as well, and recognize that people occupy many different intersections, and especially for queer people on work in more economically precarious, materially precarious, working class positions. There are certain things that say when we're going to talk about the repeal of 377A, it may afford more privileged members of queer communities more freedoms. But when it comes to working class members of the queer community, there's a lot of still limited in, because ultimately, when we talk about the debate on stuff like marriage and all these different other policies, these other public policies, ultimately it's about access to material resources. And that ultimately is what's at the core of this for me. Yeah.
I think, Carissa, you've highlighted some really important things here, and thank you for being bold enough and honest enough to be able to share it so openly for the rest of us to better appreciate what people in your position, you said middle class, actually are going through.
Working class, actually, not
working class are going through right now. Interestingly, there were two Ipsos surveys that were done. Ipsos is a very reputable French research company. It did two surveys in Singapore, one in 2018 and the other in 2022. It is instructive that between the 3 years, 2018 and 2022 in Singapore, the percentage of respondents who opposed Section 377A increased by 8%, which is very significant statistically. You know, in 3 years, the percentage of respondents who opposed Section 377A increased by 8%. Now, likewise, the percentage of respondents who remained supportive of 377A fell to less than 50%. That means in 2018, those who remained supportive of 377A, there were 55% of respondents were supportive of 377A. In 3 years down, in 2022, only 44%, means 11% down. Now, similarly, almost 50% of respondents said in the 2022 survey this year that they are willing to speak out against someone who is prejudiced against LGBTQ individuals. Now, this points to social consciousness. These clearly point to changing attitudes that some of you have been alluding to, and societal norms are also changing. Now, I'd like to put a general question: does this represent the reality on the ground? You know, to what extent did studies like this motivate the repeal of 377A? This is something for us to think about. But I'd like us to, at this point in time, it's already 9:05. I'd like us to talk perhaps about the constitutional amendment that the Prime Minister talked about in his National Day rally speech, and also the Law Minister and Home Affairs Minister, he talked about that as well. You know, so are there any thoughts about quick thoughts about the issue of same-sex marriage, sanctifying the institution of marriage as between man and woman, you know, and has been declared that that's going to be the motivation of the constitutional amendment. But I think I'd like to reiterate that the Minister for Law did stress that the Constitution is not going to be amended to actually state categorically that marriage is defined as this, but they would like to reserve the right, Parliament like to reserve the right to actually define marriage if there's a need for it. That's what it means. So quick comments in the interest of time, they have to be quick
Vishwa?
on this. Yes, Eugene.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, Parliament will sit on the 20th of October. So I suspect that they will table the amendments, and then we will know for sure exactly what the proposed changes are going to be. But I think what you've described, is accurate. Although I would disagree that that marriage is being sanctified. Marriage between a man and a woman is being sanctified. I think it is also fair to say, that the current definition, it is not correct to say that the current definition of marriage will be protected by the Constitution. I think it is more accurate to say that if there is a societal consensus, that same-sex marriage should be allowed, then Parliament will likely change that definition. So I think it's important to clear this misconceptions.
So that actually leads me to my question, right? This question has been asked by quite a few people I've spoken to. Today, the institution of marriage, or the definition of marriage, is enshrined already in the Women's Charter, correct? As a man-woman union, and it prohibits, actually explicitly prohibits same-sex marriage, the Women's Charter, right? Now, that being the case, the question is being asked, why then is there a need for further constitutional change? I guess you've already answered the question. This is to ensure that Parliament will make the decision when the time is right, if it's called upon, taking into account current attitudes and mores. Am I correct?
Think that's accurate. That's accurate, Vishwa. I think that there is a concern that litigation will fray social cohesion. And the idea here is that we need to let these attitudes evolve. And I think when you mention the surveys, I think they do suggest that attitudes are evolving. But I'm not so sure that surveys deep dive enough. I think if you ask most Singaporeans, they will certainly agree that discrimination against LGBT or anyone is probably,
or any form of discrimination.
Yeah, but I think if surveys were to delve further and to see whether they are in support of same-sex marriage, then I'm not so sure, because we don't have the data on it
at this point in time. Yes, and that also suggests that we do need as a society, whether it's IPS or any other organization, we do need to deep dive and go specifically into this and understand society better. Without a lot of the data, we are guessing, and if you want to move forward together, I think we do need help from researchers, from experts, experts even outside of Singapore, to come together and continue the conversation. At this point, I'd like to ask, I'm interested to know, Tao Chen, I'd like to come to you. You're a pastor, a Christian pastor. How does the church view this issue? And please share with us openly.
Thank you, Vishwa, for the reminder to share openly. Firstly, I do not speak for the church. I do not speak even for my own church. So I'm here as someone speaking for myself. And so these are my opinions. Now, of course, in the course of the last few years, I've grown to understand the space a lot more. And I've grown to understand the emotions. I've grown to understand the background that drive these emotions. I've grown to understand also, the thinking around, the thinking not just about the current situation, but the consequential situation from both sides. I've grown to understand this a lot more. Now, I'm not saying I know everything. And I'm not saying that my opinions that I'm about to express, are entirely balanced. And there's more I can do. There's more I can learn. I've gotten to understand. There's this perception that the conservative. Let me rephrase. There may be a perception that the conservative part of society is, dogmatic, belligerent. Partly out of ignorance or partly out of just fearing something they don't understand, or partly out of a desire to deny somebody something that someone else wants, right? A combination of that. I'm not saying this is the totality, but some combination of that. And maybe there are, okay, some parts of society that thinks that way, or that, you know, that conducts itself that way. But I've actually learned also that many and I'm using a label here, please excuse me, Alex, I don't mean to demean anyone, I'm just trying to identify, you know, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm using short form labels. So I've learned that actually some of these conservatives have been very thoughtful about what they are trying to stand for, and why they are so why they're so resolute about the things that they're standing for. So one of the things that keep cropping up in my understanding of some parts of the conservative society that I've begun to understand is that, you know, there is a concern around marriage in relation to children in particular, and their interest is in protecting children. So in that context, you know, they work backwards, right? And they realize that, you know, the one step to children is marriage. So there is a lot of effort to safeguard the interests of children as one aspect of this, right? So that's one component. I'm not saying this is the only component, okay? So I've gotten to understand that actually there's more to just, you know, dogmatism or trying to deny somebody something else and so on and so on. So let me just pause there. I see that Carissa, is it, has raised her hand, and so on, and Alex too. Yeah.
Well, before we go to Carissa, I'd like to go to Alex. Your view on this, please. Let's quick, because we need to move on. Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'll be very quick. There are really three things that I've been hearing the last few minutes, which I really need to respond to. But I'll first respond to Tao Chen's point. First of all, I totally agree that conservatism is actually a spectrum. You know, you ask me about other issues, say the death penalty or abortion or whatever, you probably find me a conservative. So, you know, and I've met lots of people, and I also agree with you, Viswa, pigeonholing it's a dead-end street. You know, it leads you nowhere. All right. But there's something that Tao Chen said, which I find very concerning, Tao Chen, and this mention about children. You mentioned exactly those words, protecting children, but you don't say protecting children from what? Because that is the unstated kind of dog whistle. I'm sorry, it's kind of a dog whistle. All right, because by using terms like that, one presupposes that the LGBT lifestyle is somehow predatory or you know, morally indefensible, and therefore children must not be exposed to that. Now, you know, there was a time, and I'll come back to this to Eugene's point earlier. Now, you know, there was a time when there were countries that criminalized interracial marriage, and you know, there were conservatives in those countries. Some of those conservatives were associated with various religious denominations, others on the other side, who actually supported legislation that criminalized interracial marriage. And there are still lots of societal disapproval of marriage across ethnicities, for example, today, or marriage across religions today. And, you know, so I think one has to be very, very careful to not presume that one's views are somehow absolute, universal, and forever. I think a good recognition about history is that these things change as humanity learns more, understands more, and sees more of other people in other parts of the world. So, you know, on this question, therefore, of same-sex marriage, I think it will come. I'm actually not particularly exercised by it. I think the time will come when Singapore will need to start recognizing the already married same-sex partners of the expatriates or the high-income talent that we want to attract to Singapore. And then, if you're going to treat the high-income expatriates well, because you recognize their same-sex marriage, then what about the citizens? How can you treat the citizens in a discriminatory way vis-a-vis the foreigners? But one quick thing that was mentioned by, I think it was Samuel, look, offensive words. Offensive words are relative. It's not absolute. I don't think any of us today is going to call somebody of Indian ancestry a kling. I don't think any of us today is going to call somebody of African ancestry a nigger. And that doesn't mean that, therefore, it's, sorry, what we're trying to say is that the words like gay lifestyle or LGBT ideology are not offensive because people should have a right to use those words. I disagree. I disagree very strongly. We all, in a good sense, know there are certain words that really would cause offense, that don't further a dialogue, that only seek to put somebody on the defensive. And I would say, let's widen our minds and be more respectful of the target community's views about what words should or should not be used with respect to them.
Okay. All right.
I am not going to call Tauchen names, for example.
So
I wouldn't allow you to.
Vishwa, I'm going to be very responsible if you will let me.
Yes, I'm going to let you because you have the right to respond.
I really appreciate the temperature, which is kept low. So I really appreciate it. And thank you, Alex, for pointing out something there in terms of clarification. So yes, you are right. What I said was incomplete, and therefore you're right to ask, for clarity on the incompleteness, so that you can understand better where I'm coming from, and I wasn't coming from insinuating, predatory behavior and that sort of stuff. Where I was coming from was because I have to summarize all of this in a very short time, right? So I've learned that from some of the people I've been speaking to, they have processed deeply and for a long time why they instinctively feel a certain way, and what is the rationale for that. And they have explained to me that when they've done the work and the research, they find that there is research and studies that conclude that children of same-sex parents don't do as well as children of biological father and mother, statistically in general. Now, I know you're shaking your head because I am also aware, because I've also had to do the same digging, Alex. So I'm not dismissing your shaking of head, because I'm also aware that there have been other studies that conclude that actually they do just as well, and there's no difference, and so on and so on. So there are different types of studies. So I had to dig a bit deeper, and then I looked at some of these narrative on why these studies conclude differently, and I'm drawn to the parallel. Disregarding same-sex parents, I'm drawn to the parallel of opposite-sex parents. With opposite-sex parents, we do know that children of families where one parent is replaced, for example, because of divorce or death, and then a subsequent parent takes over, one parent is replaced, or children who have been orphaned or abandoned and then later adopted, or of children that are born of, let's say, sperm donation, egg donation, that sort of stuff. Statistically, studies have shown that these sets of children can do worse as a result of their background of origin. Now, I'm talking about opposite sex parents. I'm talking about, in the case where there is a male and a female partner in the parentage of these cases. So I suppose for some of us, we would anecdotally understand, the trauma that, let's say, children of divorced parents go through, and as a result, there may be consequences to their upbringing and how they cope with life later on and so on. So, we don't dispute that in the case of opposite sex parents. And what I'm drawn to is the narrative that some tell me, well, if that's the case for the opposite sex parents, why would that change just because same-sex parents are now parents of the child? Because the child of a same-sex parents will have the same background of origin as the cases I just mentioned. And if we would accept that, those children statistically can do worse as a result of their background of origin, why would it not be applicable just because the parents are same-sex? Now, this is not denigrating same-sex parents as incapable and so on, right? So I'm just saying, these studies seem to indicate that. And so I've learned to appreciate that some of the concerns are actually grounded on, real concerns for the next generation, as opposed to just points of belligerence and dogmatism, trying to deny somebody else something they want and so on. So there may be some elements of that. Okay, I'm not dismissing that entirely.
So Tao Chen, I think you've made your point. I don't want us to continue on this. I think we've made both sides. In this short period, we will not be able to. These are complex points that have been raised, but I think we've got a sense of it. My own view on this is it's premature for us to draw any conclusions because there are just not enough studies that are culturally sensitive. There are so many moving parts when you make these studies. So we've heard the different points of view. I see the hands are up. Anthea, Sam, could you just and Carissa, could you just give me a few minutes because I'd like to get a sampling of the audience. There are two people here, Gerald and Harold. Also, I'd like to get your permission. Is it all right for us to extend the discussion by 15 minutes? And those who have to go, please go ahead. But I think we would want to have a little bit more time, right? Can we go to Gerald first? Gerald, a very quick comment from you, from the audience, and then to Harold. Can we unmute Gerald, and we'd like to see you on Vision?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. You're sounding like God.
Yeah, sorry, because I'm actually in a place that's not so convenient, doesn't have a proper lighting and camera.
All right. So give us a quick comment.
Yep. I think I posted about my concern about how the recent news. I was shocked when I saw how some of the US leaders were commenting on the Singapore state of affairs and how there was this, how MNCs in Singapore are encouraged to push certain activism. So I was just wondering in this webinar about how, as a concerned citizen, how is our government looking to safeguard, our local populations, our local workers, our local workforce, and against any form of activism. This could the LGBTQ could be just one. It could be other things as well. And I recognize that it's really hard to do so. So it was a shock for me to see how obvious this was being played out.
You're talking about foreign interference. Anthea, I'd like to hear your views on this. You may represent the government.
Wow, I'm not sure they want that, to be honest. No, I think Gerald, I'm sorry that you felt a little bit put off by that. I think as an open society, this sort of comments are always going to come to us. How do we prevent ourselves from being influenced or from being interfered by countries outside of ourselves? I think it comes down to both. I'm not sure we keep going to the government necessarily to help us, make sense of all of this, right? I think the fact that you have a concern and you're raising this to talk about it, that's a start. Many of this may also, as we have already found out today in this conversation, may also be a certain interpretation that you may have of what has been shared. I'm not sure activism or anyone sort of raising a view or advocacy is something we want to actually completely prevent. Would be how I would first respond to you. And secondly, if you're talking about foreign activism, well, it's up to us, right? Whether we want to actually take them on or not. In terms of their influence. So that would be a quick one. And of course, as we all know, there's already a Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, FICA, that was already passed into law. Last year, I think. Last year.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, so that's already in place. So we do have actually, we need legal protection that can be called upon actually.
Yeah,
so.
and my 2 cents, Gerald, picking up from what Anthea said, some of these things require the response should be benign neglect. Benign neglect, because if you're giving it importance by actually responding to it, and you're encouraging more people, people will continue to make their statements. We shouldn't get rattled because of that. Let's be a little bit more chill. That's my response. Let's hear from Harold.
Vishwa, that actually on your point is, you're right. What we give attention to expense, right? So
exactly.
Be careful what we give attention to. I think that's a choice we can make. At that we have control.
Yeah, and Samuel, I'll be coming to you in a while. I just want to hear Harold. Quick take from Harold.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm not sure whether you can see me.
No, we can't see you.
Thank you, Whisper, for organizing this, and all the panelists as well as the young people sharing. I really learned so much. It was wonderful to hear your views. My personal view as a gay man who has a wonderful, loving relationship for the 33 years, of course, I am happy that 377 is repealed because it doesn't make me a criminal anymore. But the reality is, I love what Carissa said. Let's remember, thanks for reminding us all, gay, straight, whatever our sexuality, the reality of living is that, we all just want to be like everybody else, to survive, to have a comfortable life, to have a roof over our heads, to live safely, comfortably, and be able to contribute to the society. So, the idea of sex, sexuality, and all that, really think about it. It figures just a small fraction of our daily lives. And, but the fact that we could even have this conversation today, I never imagined in my lifetime we could have it. I'm so glad we are having this, and in a very, mature manner. This augurs very well for Singapore. And, and I just also want to say, for the people who might have different views, which I respect, there is unnecessary fear that there's any kind of agenda by the LGBT to be against family and to push whatever lifestyle. I mean, I for one, and like mentioned by a lot of the young people, it's not homogenous. We all have our values as raised by our parents and all that. And I'm all for family, and I have no problems with the definition of marriage being between a man and a woman. At the end of the day, I personally feel that love cannot be legislated. Legislation can help protect society, give good policy, social policies, which we all support for the sake of peace and prosperity of Singapore. But between two people who love each other, two mature, consenting adults, no matter what the laws, we would choose to love and to be authentic. That's the only way to have a meaningful life. That's my view, Whisper.
Well, two things, Harold, you said that I've taken note of. One, we want to be like everybody else.
Yes.
I think that's such a powerful mantra. We want to be like everybody else.
Yes.
The second one is that love cannot be legislated.
Yes, sir.
These are powerful takeaways, and thank you so much. And this applies to every one of us, regardless of race, language, religion, or sexual persuasion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Just
thank
one
you very
more point.
much. Yes,
I'd like to raise a very, very good point. There's been just so much emphasis about, repealing the law because of its criminal, which is a good step forward. And then so much emphasis about, the definition of marriage. But actually, if you talk about, all of us agree that there shouldn't be discrimination. There's so many other aspects of discrimination that the law can address. And I think still we are on the right path to be able to even have this conversation to move forward as a society.
Yeah, that is a point that's worthy of reiteration. Alex raised that in his opening statement. That there are broader implications to this. you know, and
so it warms my heart to hear all the views expressed tonight. Thank you, Visva.
Thank you very
all
much.
All the
Alex.
panelists and the young people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Samuel, sorry for having kept you waiting for so long.
Thank you so much. I just have a few points. Thank you so much, Alex, for responding. Actually, the term gay lifestyle actually is used by my own friends' experiences. So I personally believe that such terms should not be cancelled from how they share their life story. So I think such words should not be hindered, from our open discussion. You know, yeah, and personally, I also I was looking at the Ipsos survey, and I also realized that the survey results show that 12% of the respondents identify as LGBTQ+, which would make Singapore one of a country with one of the highest proportions of LGBTQ+ persons, which is quite improbable actually at this point. So I'm not very sure about the reliability of this study. And actually, my last point actually is to Tao Chen, who said to talk about the protecting children. And actually, I'm one with a firm belief that children have a natural right to a father and mother endowed by nature. So that is something that I think was what he was trying to emphasize. And this is something that our society so far still embraces if you look at national survey results. And I think that currently this discussion does indeed lead to the further downstream changes that would talk about the rights of children to have a father and a mother. Yeah, so those are some of my thoughts. And personally, really appreciate everything that has been shared. Yeah, so yeah, back to you.
Thank you, Sam. Carissa.
Yeah, I just have 3 points.
Sorry, by the way, we are wrapping up.
Okay.
We are in the wrapping up zone. Okay. So
Right,
if you have anything you want to say, this is the time.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So I only have 3 points to bring up. The first point, actually, Alex has already jumped the gun and brought up for me the part about asking when we say protect.
Could you speak a little slower?
Okay. Yes. All right. So
Yeah,
the first
okay.
point I wanted to bring up, Alex has very helpfully brought it up earlier, already quite a couple of minutes earlier, when it was asked, when there was this point brought up about protecting children. Then the question I asked was, protect children from whom and from what? Right? Because I think that's the thing, that when we say protect from what, right? So I think we need to answer that. The second, and so that one is a very quick point. The second is that I think when we talk about family, I think a lot of this discussion is centered around the centrality, the importance, the salience of family, both within secular and religious perspectives as well. And I think this is something that, coming from someone in the queer community, with both a very supportive biological family as well as a very supportive chosen family, from members of my community, I think this is something that I very much appreciate. And what's at the core of family, ultimately, what's at the core of functional, healthy family relationships, supportive family relationships, is about care through kinship, whatever this kinship looks like. It can look like, of course, it can look like biological family. It can also look like chosen families. But at the core of it is that care is a central part of it. A family without care is not a family at the end of the day. So, and this is something that I think is very, very essential to how I see this perspective, this discussion about family and protecting the family. Which then brings to my third point, right? When we talk about protecting the family, I'm gonna be a bit candid here and share.
I mean, so far you weren't.
I mean, a bit more candid,
Okay,
candid.
all right.
I'm gonna be a bit more candid here and say something, right? So very recently, I encountered in fact, this has been going on since July, or rather end of June, in fact, sometime after Pink Dot, in fact, serial harassment case by this one individual who has been targeting over 10 to 20 plus, both members of the queer community and outside, and our families. This serial harasser has been targeting members of even our families. And this person has exploited loopholes of our institutions in order to threaten our families and make us feel unsafe. One of my friends has had both her grandparents murdered. That's part one. Part two, my family, this individual texted one of my friends and said, got it, I found your address. The cops are usually reliable. So what they did was they threatened my family, stalked my family down to their address, and then scared me and my parents into making a 999 call so that the police would go up to my doorstep, and then they were like, yes, now the police have gone to your doorstep, we can identify your unit now. I do not feel safe in there. So what does protecting family look like here, right? Because these harms still very much exist. And when we talk about protecting family, in my opinion, it feels a bit hollow when we're fussing about the definition of family. When my literal family, both my biological family and my chosen family, does not feel safe. And it's not me only, there's many people who are going through the same thing. So when we talk about protecting family, I think we need to go beyond the form and down to the substance. At the end of the day, if we want to protect family, we have to make Singapore a space where it's safe for whatever families to care for each other, as well as to protect from these kinds of harms, which are very systemic and which are usually caused by many other factors. The individual concerned here grew up in a very abusive family. And from that, and of course, this is not representative of everyone. There are many, I have many friends who grew up in abusive families and turned out to be wonderful people. But this person grew up, and because of that, they took away the lesson that if my family treated me this way, then I treat everyone else this way as well. And that's why a lot of this is playing out.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that, Carissa. Farah? And then we go to Raj.
I think
your concluding remarks.
I want to point out, right, at the end of it, whether our discussion about what family should look like, what environment children should be raised in, you know, what our definitions on all these things, what we need to protect at the end of the day is that no one should be harmed in any way for whatever views that they hold. Carissa, to be honest, I can feel a lot of what you feel in terms of danger. Because personally, I was in a situation where, you know, you feel threatened for certain perspectives that your family hold, okay? And I don't think it's right, no matter what your perspectives are, that you have been threatened, that you have been harassed. And I think that should be something that is pushed for on all grounds, no matter what principles, no matter what beliefs you have. It doesn't have to be religious, it doesn't have to be secular, you know, and also to be honest, if you can say that gay lifestyle or gay ideology is offensive, to be honest, the term dogmatic is also very offensive on the opposite end of the spectrum. And to be honest, there are certain comments and certain energies in here that still makes me feel uncomfortable. But I think discomfort is okay, because to ensure that there is diversity, you have to feel discomfort. You know, to have an open conversation, you have to be put in a place of discomfort. As long as behind those open conversation, there is no threat, there is no aggression, there is no violence. And I think that's why maybe there is a shift in the dynamics between the, I don't like to say this, but maybe in the era that among the youth, we are more open to using certain terminologies a bit more candidly, because even among my friends who are in the LGBT community, they called it in affirming, okay, that they call it the gay lifestyle, and they're okay with me calling their lifestyle the gay lifestyle, or calling their activism as the LGBTQ ideology. So maybe that is where Samuel and I are coming from, but we understand that where Alex is coming from might be different. But at the end of the day, nothing is homogeneous, you know, and people should feel safe, and there is no need to cancel and to openly attack and say that, hey, your views should be banned. Hey, you are being like this, you know, your perspective should not be given weight in any, and you shouldn't be made to feel like a fool or to feel uneducated or unintellectual for certain perspectives that you might hold.
Get your point. And so it's really about creating a safe space, right? Now, Raj.
Yes, 3 quick points. So firstly, I wanted to actually highlight how even in today, when we witness this exchange of certain words, I mean between Toh Chen and Alex, it is actually a learning point for all of us, in that not everyone may be cognizant of the weight and impact of how certain terminologies may have been understood by certain parties. And I say this as a heterosexual male, in that sometimes in coming into these conversations, we might not understand how these terminologies have affected members of the LGBT community. And I completely empathize and understand the pain that many from the LGBT community have gone throughout their lives and multiple stages and such. And as such, I think what is constructive and important is for us to understand that in having such conversations, such controversial or spicy points should actually be used for education, such that we are all the better for it. And I'm sure from our conversation today, we have at least learned something new, not to use such a terminology. So that's my first point. I think second point comes from social identity theory, in that we often highlight the differences of others and exaggerate that differences between like our group vis-a-vis another group. And we like to also exaggerate the similarities that we have between members of our own group. So in that sense, I think it is important for us to really understand that when we are conceptualizing our own understanding of others, it is crucial to understand that at the end of the day, the same traumas, the same pain, if not so, is very much present and manifest within the other community. And as such, it is crucial for us to approach this sensitive issue from a very empathetic point in first creating friendships and rapport and opening up the platforms for having such raw conversations and understanding the true need of trauma. And that brings me actually to my third point, which is essentially that the conversation here should be also looking at how the material needs, material resources that are required by members of the LGBT community can be better achieved, because this is a fundamental concern that they are highlighting. So many of, for example, members of the queer community have also expressed to me, I mean, some of my friends, that sometimes because of what happens at home, they actually have to seek shelter with friends or with other queers who can at least rent out a room. So in that sense, when we do understand that such realities are happening, I think it is crucial and important for us to understand that perhaps let's look to see how these needs can be better addressed, while at the same time also understanding that fundamentally fundamentally religions in itself, in their scriptural lessons, have a particular view and a particular stance. And like how To Chen essentially said, in that marriage was conceptualized with the view of having good moral children who would continue society. And in that sense, I said, that is one thing. Right. And one last statement that I just wanted to quickly add for the religious.
Very short.
Yes, very short, in that we should be exclusively devoted to our faith, but inclusive in our attitudes towards others in society.
Well
that
said.
combination will allow us to.
Thank you. All right. So time check. It's 9:44. So I think we've had a very good discussion. I'd like to end with the four panelists. Please try and keep it to 30 seconds a minute, because you've made your points. It's just your final thoughts, right? Keep it brief. Brief is good, right? So I'd like to start with Alex. You have to unmute.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, thank you. Right, thank you. I'm going to throw in one thought that occurred to me during this session, and that's that when we were talking especially about families and marriage and so forth, it is that there sometimes is a misconception that law ought to be prescriptive. There are a lot of people who conceive of law as something analogous to the 10 Commandments received by Moses. Thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. Actually, good law should be protective rather than prescriptive. In other words, good law should just recognize that this is how people form their supportive networks. This is how people form their families, caring and supportive, as Carissa said. And then the law should step in then and protect these formations, social formations that people have made, rather than prescribe, oh, you shall make this kind of family and you shall not make that kind of family. I think that's an important point to remember. That's the purpose of law, because if law is too prescriptive, law becomes divisive, because somebody is out there is going to say, that doesn't apply to me, or that's no good for me, or whatever. So for law to be inclusive and supportive, law must support what exists substantially.
Thank you, Alex. So I'll go to the lawyer. He's looking around.
Yep. Vishwa, I just want to conclude, my thoughts, by in many ways agreeing with Alex. The proposed changes to the law can perhaps provide the structure and the rules, but they do not imbue us, with the requisite values and norms to build bridges, across differences. So let me, end with two questions for us to think about. These are questions that I ponder, on this very delicate matter. The first is, can we have principled disagreements while being in community? And by community, I mean one that is constituted of and denominated by diversity as well as staunch beliefs. The second is, how do we love our neighbor, who does not share the same values as us, right? So thank you very much for having me.
Great questions. They're sufficiently inconvenient. Thank you. Right, Tao Chen, the pastor.
Well, I thought we've been exemplary on both of those questions tonight, Eugene. So maybe the answer is, watch this thing again. It is clear, Vishwa, from this evening that we do need to dialogue on the grounds of reason, with the desire to understand, and with the objective, I would suggest, of trying to reach for the overall greater good of our nation. So I personally would welcome further dialogue to refine the input that we should have in the public square to our society, to our culture, and even to our government on what is good for our nation, what is good for our people as a whole. Now, I personally desire such dialogue even when we deal with diversity and differences, not to drive division and belligerence in society. We are actually leading our society by the example we set tonight, as we've done with the young people here. We should care for the unity and greater good of our nation because this is our backyard. We live here, and for many of us, we have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for the good intentions that were infused in tonight, and I look forward to many more such good intentions in dialogues of the future.
Thank you, Tao Chen. I'm very grateful that you left investment banking. Right, Anthea, you got the last word.
Oh, thank you, Vishwa. Just first of all, thank you also for convening, this panel and this discussion. I think it's absolutely necessary. It's been a wonderful session for me. I think I can't help but think that we should just move on from 377A and in all the conversations we talked about, we should really be asking for an anti-discrimination law that probably will unite all of us, right? In every aspect of our lives. So that's what's come up for me. The second thing that's come up for me is this, this idea of the legal and moral codes, right? And I think Eugene and Alex alluded to that. I think as much as laws should reflect, the social norms, as you said, Vishwa, it should also be, engendering, right, the values and the kind of society that we want to be. So it plays two roles. It's not just one. And that's come strongly to me. On the note of the family, I would have to agree that, instead of looking at the form and obsessing over the form, that we really need to take a step back. As someone who's working on the ground, even the most traditional of family units are so broken, right? And children are struggling and all of that. So I think, on the ground, I'm seeing that the form really doesn't ensure, safety of the children, nor having a thriving family. So we really should take a step back and ask ourselves as a society, right, what provides for a family that will give stability and safety and therefore allow everyone in the family to thrive, especially the children, and not to be obsessed on the form. So that would be, what I've taken away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthea. And you see, Carissa is applauding. Thank you. I know there are many more points and questions we have. Unfortunately, we have to end it here. We have already overrun by 20 minutes. I believe we had a good discussion. within the time frame. I certainly have become personally a lot more aware. I've learned a lot. Thank you, panelists, Alex, Tao Chen, Anthea, Eugene, and our 4 fabulous youth representatives, Carissa, Farah, Samuel, Raj, and of course, our live audience for making time to join us, and Gerald and Harold for sharing your perspectives. Do feel free to share your thoughts and views about the topic and about this discussion on our IQ Inconvenient Questions Facebook page. Let me end by sharing some of my own thoughts very briefly, right? I believe that it will help all of us if we don't see any of these developments as a compromise of our ideas, of our ideals or our values. Let's try and move away, even if it's temporary, from a binary zero-sum orientation. We need to recognize and, yes, accept that societal attitudes and mores are changing, especially among the younger generation. This is a reality. This is the reality. In his National Day rally speech, Prime Minister Lee put it most aptly, in my view, quote, "In a society where diverse groups have strongly held opposing views, everyone has to accept that no group has or can have things all their way." Close. As in any change, there will be adversity, there will be discomfort, there'll be tension, intolerance, there'll be insecurity, and there will certainly be anger. But that doesn't mean that we should not embrace change. Change is going to happen whether we like it or not. So we might as well go with it and partake in conversations along the way. The internet, especially social media, can be a platform for meaningful conversations. It can also heighten negative emotions and make us feel we are under siege. It is precisely during times such as this when our mettle is tested as one people. Do we want to act on righteousness and self-righteousness, or believe in restraint and accommodation as a shared interest, a higher calling, so to speak? We have a choice. We have come a long way since 1965, because it's seldom been about you or about me. We have come a long way together because it's often been about us. It's about shared interests. Let's continue talking with each other. More importantly, let's listen. This has been Inconvenient Questions.